Hello, welcome to the Bangers and Classics podcast with James Ruppert and David Milloy. So, James, how are you today?
I'm extremely well, thank you very much, David. I hope you can hear me there.
Oh, perfectly. Yep, yep.
Yeah.
Coming through loud and clear. And no doubt I'm coming through loud and unclear at your end.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you absolutely. No, all's well here. The snow's gone. That was all very exciting for a while. It was deeply, deeply cold. And actually, strangely enough, on an unrelated, unmotoring note, I can confirm that air source heating is not as good as a blazing log fire. If anyone's thinking of changing all their heating in sub-zero temperatures, caution is required when it comes to these newfangled ways of heating your home. It really did struggle when it was very, very cold indeed, and I also believe people with electric cars struggle. So it's a sort of slightly related dig at new technology. Whereas if you've got the old coal-fired or log-fired ways of doing things, you're virtually guaranteed of drying off and being fit and well. Whereas with the others, there's a bit more uncertainty. And I like certainty in my life.
So, yeah, sometimes the old technology is the best. And of course, it's not really just technology from the past. I think sometimes the best. Car names, for one thing. I mean, nowadays we get names, some of them, as if they're created by 5-year-old children, or at least spelled by 5-year-old kids. Names like Car, K-A, Cougar, K-U-G-A, Mocha, M-O-K-A-K-A, and then plus names that really, I don't know where they're coming from. Evija is one. I really don't see that being a great hit for Lotus as a name, compared to the likes of the Esprit, the Eclat, the Elan, the Elise even. All strong names. Evija just doesn't have a ring to it. But you go back to the past, and I'll give you a couple of names. No doubt can come back with some more. But in the past, obviously, you had names like Spitfire, Interceptor, Avenger.
Absolutely. You're coming up with the best names ever for cars. There was the Avenger Tiger. I don't think you can get any better than that.
No,
Um,
it's
but I mean, you, David, as a lawyer, know they're doing this to protect themselves because obviously in Azerbaijan, if you say Avenger, it means something terrible. So that's the reason why they've emasculated the names, but it is quite awful. And actually, should we really care what anyone thinks in any other country? We just think that's a great name for us.
well, what they can do is do what Toyota did with the MR2, and they couldn't call it the MR2 in France because MR2 sounds
Yeah.
like a French word that can cause some offence to the easily offended. And they called it a Toyota MR there. So why not call cars names that work in a particular territory or territories, and then change it? So if you want to call a car, for example, a name in China that wouldn't really work here, we'll call it that there. Call it something else here. Why not? It's not as if it's going to cost a vast amount of money to do it.
No, I think that is their argument that it would cost one penny per unit, and if you spread that across a million units, it starts to add up. But I completely agree with you, and you would think they would just allow each individual marketing country and area to come up with whatever they want really. But what you're saying, yeah, is that car names are meaningless, boring, obtuse, and they don't really mean anything at all, and they're just not very exciting. I mean, it was quite nice when we had home county names for Austins and Morrises over the years and things like that. It was sort of quite quaint. I think we need a huge overhaul of the whole naming procedure, because, as you say, you'll never come across a car which is any finer than a Jensen Interceptor. Yeah, I've got a Jensen Interceptor. Yeah, which is far better than I've got a. I don't know what what it would be, because they're all so bad, aren't they now?
Well,
I'm
not good.
just
No, no.
no, that's right. Yeah, a Kia something or other. Yeah.
Mind you, James. I mean, you don't really want to go to say to people, especially in polite company, "Hey, I've got an escort." That could be taken the
Yeah,
wrong way.
it certainly can.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay,
But
fair enough. Moving on. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that every car name of the past was a good name. I mean, for example, the Marina, it wasn't a very strong name.
no.
And maybe, I don't know, did marinas have problems with water ingress? Maybe that's why they were called that. I don't know.
No, exactly. Who knows? I don't know. Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, I think we will constantly return to car names because that's where it all spreads from. And very few cars can sort of survive on numbers alone. You can do it to an extent with Ferraris and Porsches, but really, a car does need a name, I think, because then you know exactly what it is.
Yeah, I didn't mind numbers so much. I mean,
Mm,
I had a few Renaults back in the day, a couple of R11s and R19s.
yeah.
I didn't mind that at all. Same with Peugeot. With their
Mm.
names, I mean, 205, especially the GTI, it's still got a strong sound to it.
It
You know,
it has, yeah, absolutely. I've just had some emails actually because I wrote about a 505 estate, and it's incredible the cascade of people who you just have to put those. You only just have to say the numbers, and people come up with all sorts of reminiscences about using them as taxis in Africa with about 23 people on board and things like that. And yes, it's amazing sort of what things that they can conjure up, which I don't think a full um, cougar is going to do exactly the same. Um,
no, no.
yeah, because you,
Um,
you did note in your fine book about the full probe, um, because because
whoops.
yeah, well that
There we go again. It's just like the
yeah,
Escort.
absolutely. But you see, probe, I mean, as I understand it at the time, I think they were trying to justify it because obviously, if you speak American, space probe means something
Mm,
terribly exciting, whereas
yeah,
to us, it's just because we're basically schoolboys. We just think, yeah, that's really funny.
yeah,
Um,
this is true. Overgrown schoolboys, the oldest
yeah,
12-year-olds in town.
absolutely.
Nothing wrong with that at all.
No,
No, but yeah, I mean, yeah, the probe. It wasn't its name that killed it. Let's be honest.
no.
It just wasn't as good as it could have been, and it just didn't live up to the Capri. I mean, it may have been a better car in many respects than the Capri. To be
Yeah.
honest, it probably was.
Mm.
But unfortunately, you had Steve Coogan doing his bit, which again probably didn't do it that much harm. I think the damage was done by then.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
it's just uninspired. That was the problem. Same with the Cougar. At least they
Yeah.
named that one properly. It came
Mm.
along tail end of the 90s. Remember the advert with Dennis Hopper?
That's right.
Yeah. Again, not necessarily a bad car. Possibly was it the New Edge styling? I think they called it.
It
It
was,
had,
wasn't it? That's
and
right.
yeah, it didn't quite work
No,
for
but
me. I
then,
don't think.
well, that's right. Especially if you think back to Mercury Cougars, as they were, which were quite fabulous things, weren't they?
Mm.
Brilliant American concoctions. They were just, just wonderful, wonderful creations that we will never see the like of again. They were so over the top. But yeah, the Cougar was a rather dreary excuse for a Mondeo, I suppose, in a way.
Yeah, well, having said that, I mean, thinking about it, Americans come up with some great names for cars. Obviously, you think about the Mustang, the Thunderbird, the Charger, the Challenger.
Yeah,
There's a whole list of car names from America that are
that's
very
right.
strong. I mean,
Yeah,
the cars by themselves not always have been great, and let's face it, there was a time in the 70s in particular when they were pretty poor, but the names were still strong.
well,
And
that's
they
right.
still go to this day. I mean, Daytona's another one. I
Yeah,
mean, the Ferrari Daytona was never actually called the Ferrari Daytona, but Dodge made one called the Daytona. I think it was early 80s, if
yeah.
memory serves me right. If you want to see one, folks, there's a film called Black Moon Rising that stars Tommy Lee Jones. Not a great film, but you'll get to see a Dodge Daytona in it, so that's always something. Anyway, names is one thing. Perhaps now we should move across to something else, and that is adverts. You're listening to the Bangers and Classics podcast with James Ruppert and David Milloy. Talked about car names, James. What
Yeah.
about car advertisements? Would you agree that car advertisements from the past are better, generally speaking, than those we get today?
They are. I think that's an irrefutable one in that rules and regulations and the advertising standards authority have neutered every single car ad completely, so that they're reduced to I really don't understand what they're trying to say to me, and they're not even informative. They're not even telling me it's got a big boot. They're just it's lifestyle-y, to the max, and I think that's the only way they think people buy cars now is does it communicate a lifestyle, but there's no attempt to make it exciting. There's no attempt to engage you. There's no you don't really want one when you actually see the advert. I've not seen a car advert in years when I thought, well, I must go and sell the house so I can go and buy one of those. It just doesn't exist anymore.
No. I mean, to me, it's a bit of Aldous Huxley in operation. What you get now with a car ad tends to be a bland, modern cityscape with a bland, modern identikit car driven by identikit actors. There's no personality, there's no soul. And you compare that to something like, for example, the Citroën BX GTI 16 valve advert from I think it was the early 90s. All it had was Marcello Gandini, a black BX 16 valve, and the Italian countryside. But it told you everything you needed to know about the car, and it looked great. It was memorable. It didn't necessarily make you want to run out and buy the car, but it put it in your mind that if you were thinking perhaps of buying a car of that type, you'd definitely put that one into consideration. That's how I see it. I'm not the sort of person who's going to jump out and buy something on the strength of a commercial. I'm hoping a bit deeper than that. But a good commercial should put a product in the mind of a potential consumer so that, they'll remember it. And if they're going to buy something of that ilk, then they'll certainly give it consideration and evaluate it when the time comes. And again, another one, which really annoyed the heck out of me back in the day, but it made its point, was the Renault 25 adverts. Do you remember those with the yuppie couple?
Yeah, that's right. Yes, I think I was engaged to that woman for a while at some point.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think she realised it, but I was very, very much in love with that plummy voiced woman who wanted to. Was it Ian's with me, Sounds with me, and we've got the backing? I think was.
Are you sure not being a bit hasty?
Yeah, that's it. Hasty. That was it. It was the way she said hasty. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, see, I remember I told you about the guy I used to work with when I was doing my training who used to quote Blade Runner all the time.
Yeah.
Well, the chap in that commercial his screen name was David. Of course, I'm David. And I had a Renault. So what did I get for 2 years of my traineeship? Aren't you being a bit hasty, David, from the other side of the room? So I've got reason to hate that commercial. I did, however, like the Renault 25, but that's another story.
Yeah.
But you had that. The other advert, I think, possibly my favourite, and it made all the good points about the car. It showed its features, the reasons why I think of buying it, and it used humour, was the Citroën Visa commercial from about 1982. It was a driving school with a sort of Clouseau-esque driving instructor and a somewhat crazy pupil. You can probably find it on YouTube to this day. It may have dated in some people's minds. I still find it funny, but then again, as we've said before, we're over going 12-year-old shame. So what the heck. But yeah, and also the Nicole and Papa. Remember those two?
Absolutely, yeah.
And again, I didn't particularly like the adverts, but they were memorable. What you get now is just blandness. It's just they all went into each other.
Well, it is the sort of Euro-ness of it all, in that, again, you have one advertising company makes the advert and they just dub it into a different language. So this is just, it doesn't mean anything to anyone anywhere, but that's what they think it does. They actually think they're appealing to everybody, but they're actually appealing to no one because of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a simple process, and I'm not an ad man, God knows that. I'm not a marketeer. But to me, how I would set up an ad if I was running one, I would emphasize the car's attributes in it, and I'd wrap it up with, I'd use humor or a storyline or something distinctive, anything that made it memorable to get that message across. And then I'd try to, if it was a print ad, I'd try and wrap it up, with a clear and memorable slogan or catchphrase. And perhaps the best example of that, if you remember, probably back in the 70s, maybe early 80s, the Volkswagen advert. It was a cartoon man holding a petrol pump to his head, and all it said below it, and the only text on it was, "Or buy a Volkswagen." Brilliantly simple, brilliantly effective.
Well, that's right. Yes, it's the Dane and Bernbach. I've actually got a book, a signed book, actually, which has all of those adverts in them. And again, one of the most famous ones. And most of these were produced in the States for the States. Was how does the driver of the snowplow get to the snowplow? And that, and obviously, yeah,
Wonderful.
it is, and that's it. That's all the ad is. It's fantastic, and there is nothing. No one has the clarity of thought, and it's a bit like actually the British ads for BMW in the late 70s and early 80s were again very, very clear, very aspirational. You need to have a sense of humour to get them, but they appealed to your cleverness, and that is what we do not get anymore. For my sins, I did used to work in Charlotte Street in London, and I did used to write ads, and so I was slightly involved in it. I've worked in all the worst professions apart from selling houses. I think I've done everything that has been despised by people.
Politician.
I actually haven't done that, but yeah, I've worked in merchant banks. I've worked in advertising. I've worked in car sales. And I've been a journalist, so there you go. So that's all the worst professions you can be in. But I would agree with you that I think car ads are actually fairly straightforward to get right, and obviously that's what we should do after this podcast is finished. The Bangers and Classics podcast is we start the Bangers and Classics advertising agency, because I think we can solve every problem that the advertising industry has.
Either that or we'll end up doing 5 years in the Tower of London or something.
Absolutely.
But fair enough, it's a risk worth taking. Yeah, you mentioned the USA ads for Volkswagen. A little plug here. I think one of them is mentioned in my book, The Ultimate Classic Car Quiz Book. And it's in reference to one advert which I think really got the ball rolling for Volkswagen in America in the late 50s, early 60s. It was an advert that was called Think Small. And it was about the Volkswagen Beetle, which wasn't selling in huge numbers at that point. They didn't have a massive budget. They went to an ad agency, said, we need to run these ads, but only in black and white. And the work they produced over the next few years was quite exceptional. I'm not a fan of Volkswagen, I'll be honest about that. But the adverts they produced then were fantastic. They were great quality, very informative, very clear, highly understandable. And they gave customers or would-be customers all the information they would want to have. Possibly not boot size, but you can always buy a motor and look at the Suitcase Test for that.
Absolutely. I mean, when it comes to I think people also miss, and we were talking several weeks ago about the Suitcase Test, and that again is something that's missing from car adverts. That if all you're selling is a family car, then just tell us what it will do. Whether you can get the family in and the dog in and all that sort of stuff. And my favourite ad that I've told you about, which you have no recollection of, but you can find it on YouTube, people, obviously, is the late, great Bruce Forsyth. And it would have been very late 70s. And he was plugging the Chrysler Avenger estate. And it was a game show setting. There was a lucky couple who'd obviously won the car or had the car, and apart from saying how fantastic it was, there was a bucket of water there, which he threw over it to demonstrate the fact that it had electronic ignition, so it would start without any worry in the wet and the rain of our great country. But it was pure Bruce, and you would remember it for that reason. You'd remember, like I do, that it had electronic ignition, and I think it just had the price at the end. And in many ways, for a basic family car, that's all you need to know, isn't it?
Yeah.
That you can, everybody can get on board. It's going to start. It's going to be great, and it's only going to cost you, £2,000 or something. So even those adverts, but also it was amusing because it was Bruce. And as you say, you don't laugh or snigger or do anything much with any adverts at all these days, whereas back in the day, there were adverts involving Morecambe and Wise and Texaco and James Hunt. And again, people, you can find those on YouTube and think, wow, people used to have these as adverts. They were funny.
Well, Tony and Ridley Scott, the film directors, were they made their names in advertising, first of all. And one of my favourite ads of that era I think it was for Shell. I could be wrong, but I think it was Shell. It was called Open Road. And it just featured, countryside, small filling station, a guards red Porsche 944, and the theme to Easy Rider, Born to be Wild by Steppenwolf. Very simple premise, fantastic ad. actually made me want to buy a 944 more than it did buy Shell Fuel. So perhaps it missed the mark. But it's just wonderful. It was the cinematography was excellent, and it was a quality, the production value of it that really made it stand out. There's no CGI, there's no messing around. It's all just shot beautifully. I should expect from Tony Scott is some of his films perhaps weren't the best in terms of plot. This is a chap who directed Top Gun, various other movies, Days of Thunder, etc., Crimson Tide. Sometimes the plots weren't brilliant, or the dialogue wasn't brilliant, but you could guarantee they'd always look great on screen. And the same was true of that advert. Check out the Bangers and Classics website at www.bangersandclassics.com. And why not also check out Free Car magazine? It's published by James Ruppert, and it's, as the title suggests, free. Point your browsers at www.freecarmag.com to find out more. We're back after the commercial break, and our next topic of conversation is about choosing a car for a new TV or film hero. So, James, the premise is you're making a TV show or a film. It's about an international crime fighter or your international man of mystery. Any era you choose, what car would you give the hero and why?
Well, David, you very, very kindly teed this up for me. I think because you know what answer is going to come.
Yeah, I've got a pretty good idea.
Which is fabulous because I have gone down that route, and I did go to the bother of actually creating effectively a comic superhero. They call them graphic novels these days, which is just a fancy way of saying comic. Really. But I did this 20 years ago, and I created a character called Spencer Hayes. And I really liked the 1970s. 70s were great. It's a time when you could do anything at all, despite the power cuts, despite all sorts of dreadful things going on in the 1970s. And the 1970s was actually in full colour, whereas other eras of life were black and white. It was actually quite groovy and great. It was the working class 60s, really. And you did get these working class heroes, which occasionally bobbed up in films. And I suppose it's a bit like, Michael Caine in a way was, a very working class hero, but sort of had lots of fun. And yeah, I created a superhero called Spencer Hayes. He did exist for a while on the 4Car website, and this is going back way back when the internet was a tiny little baby. And it did run for a while, and I've revived him occasionally. But basically, I put him behind the wheel of what I thought was the most fabulously modern and far-thinking car that you could have got.
Can I guess?
Of course, you can have a guess. Who knows?
Was it an Austin Allegro?
It could well have been that. But actually, it turned out to be a Jensen Interceptor. Even though I know in real life they weren't fantastic, and if you had one at the time of the fuel crisis, which it would have been in 1973, you'd have got 9 miles to the gallon if you were lucky, and you would have been bankrupt by the end of the street. And also, they weren't built well. They were built okay, but because they were hand built, they were very specific. And I've got lots of stories from people who've owned them, and like the left door, the near side door is slightly smaller than the offside door because it's hand built, and that's just the way things are, and they rusted to bits in no time. But to me, it was still a tremendously exciting car, very advanced car, much more advanced than a certain James Bond's car, which was a bit creaky by comparison. And I just had a bit of fun with that. It's been the most tremendous waste of my time. If I think about the amount of time I spent, because I actually drew it, I'm a very average drawer. But if I think about the amount of time I spent creating and writing the stories and doing all sorts of things, I should have done something much more useful, like mowed the lawn or something, because it's just I've just never made any money from certain projects, and that's one of that, and that's a major one. I think I did believe at one point it could be a major motion picture, or it could have been on the telly or something, but that never came to pass. But it was great for everybody who indulged me. And if we are plugging just a tiny little plug, it's a very indulgent book. I've just brought together all the drawings I did, and I put them in one place because I just think, well, one day I'll be in a home, and at least it'll all be in a book that I can point to someone and say, look, I once created a comic character and it's over there in that book if you can be bothered to read it. And then you can feed me my meal through a straw. If I can speak, of course, but it's just all I've done is that over Christmas I was a bit bored, and I just thought, I've got all these drawings, all these pictures, and my relatives will put them into a skip or just burn them, and so what I better do is just put them all in one place and put it into a book. So if nobody buys it, it doesn't matter. I've got a record for myself. But again, I wasted more time over Christmas where maybe I could have been drinking and eating more, but instead I put it all into a book. But thank you very much for that opportunity, David. But
No, totally.
obviously, I'd like to know who you would create and what would they drive.
Okay, the background to my character is that at the end of the 1960s, the world started to change, and the kaleidoscope of the swinging 60s turned into the monochrome of the gritty 70s. What happened then was that the unseen forces that watch over us decided to preserve an international man of mystery, just one sole example of the knight errants who had roamed the globe, fighting crime, seducing women, and keeping the champagne houses solvent. However, they chose the wrong guy. And they've been left with him. He's been sleeping under the Eildon Hills all these years, and now he's been revived because they decree that the world needs another international man of mystery as a hero. The chap they have got is best described as a cross between Simon Templar, Don Quixote, and Norman Wisdom. And that means that he's dashing, honourable, incorruptible, but a bit of a clot. He always wears black, and strictly between us, the reason for that is it's pretty good at hiding stains. He's more like Don Quixotic than Don Quixote. Anyway, he's always accompanied by his faithful sidekick Tupper, who is effectively Brighouse's answer to Sancho Panza. The two of them normally cut about in a black Alfa Romeo GT V6 that was supplied to him when he was awoken from stasis. However, the powers that be refused his request to get a Jensen Interceptor because they balked at the cost of repairing the damage that he would probably cause if he were to be let loose in one. However, even the Alpha is currently off the road, and that's as a result of an incident involving the erroneous pursuit of a pizza delivery scooter, a plush wedding reception held in the grounds of Sir Humphrey Smythe Farbleton's modest 125-bedroom castle, a loose magnum of Dom Perignon 68, and an outdoor swimming pool. So for the time being, our international man of mystery and Tupper are having to make do with a 1984 Fiat Uno with 3 missing wheel trims, a radio that's stuck on Kiss FM, and an intermittently faulty alternator. We're going to leave you on a cliffhanger because at this moment in time it remains to be seen whether you'll get the Alpha back, whether the Fiat will make it to the end of the road, and whether he'll be able to get the stains out of his best suit. And on that note, we'd like to say thank you very much for listening to this week's podcast. We'll be back soon. In the meantime, take care, thank you, and goodbye.